Hello and welcome to the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by my co-host Bryan Smith. Bryan, how are we doing on after this first full week of Cubs minor league baseball? Right, we had last week we recorded. Me and Zumac recorded, and it was the first weekend of all the affiliates. This is the first full week. We've had a full week of minor league baseball action. How you feeling?
I'm doing great. It's nice to have 20, 30 games a week if you're counting the major league team to just, be checking in on and bouncing back and forth between. It's good to be back fully all the way in.
What is your strategy when it comes to catching as much of different games as possible?
Yeah, so I have two relatively young kids, so I am pretty rarely these days able to watch the minor league games live. If it's a big time starter, sometimes I'll sort of do it from my phone during other things, but mostly I'm catching up after the fact. I'm sort of seeing the things in the box scores that I want to see, and then just zooming through the games real quick. So I probably get parts of every game each day, but very rarely am I a front to back guy anymore.
Yeah, that's actually how I've been this year. In past years, I've watched, I'd say live a few days a week. I've seen live, and then I go back and watch. But so far this year, I've been predominantly going back in the evening, right before bed. I'll go back and watch through starts. I'm still on the thing where I'm looking at specific starters first. Yep. And then just catching anything else possible. Honestly, we say it every single episode, but having the that community of Cubs prospect followers on Twitter is extremely helpful for me as far as the hitters go. I'm not seeing necessarily every single live at bat and seeing how Kevin Alcantara spitting on an outside slider or something like that. But to get those highlights for the hitters has been terrific as I go back and see certain at bats from players. And then every pitch of starts from the starting pitchers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was going back to find a swing of a guy we're going to talk about today, and I searched his name on Twitter, and literally the same at bat was some 5 different people video captured it, and I was able to find it that fast. I'm like, man, I don't think any of the other 29 teams have this sort of level of craziness with the guys on Twitter that are video capturing and willing to get in the weeds in this way. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man. So let's get started with. So we have a pretty full episode. We're gonna talk a little bit about the Ian Happ extension and what that means for Cubs minor league outfield prospects. We got a couple 20-year-olds playing in AA that we want to talk about in PCA and Owen Caissie today, and then. At the AAA level, we've seen Matt Mervis and Christopher Morel. Again, Christopher Morel, not technically a prospect, but by all intents and purposes, he is a prospect. So we'll talk a little bit about him. And then we got to talk about some starting pitcher prospects. We do that every episode, and for good reason, because there's a lot of really good starting pitcher prospects in the system. So we're going to talk about Kohl Franklin and Cade Horton today because they are worth our while for sure. And we'll probably end the episode with some Haydn McGeary talk because the fans love some Haydn McGeary. So let's start off at the top. We'll start off with what the Major League team has done. They extended Ian Happ, which you and I are both fully on board with the Cubs extending Ian Happ, and I think especially for the contract that they got him for, especially considering that. But this is the Prospect Podcast, so I want to kick it to you first for just brief thoughts on the Ian Happ extension from Ian Happ's perspective, from the Major League perspective. But what we're going to talk about here is what that means short-term, long-term to a certain degree, but mostly short-term in the next few years, I guess. Short-term means different things. For this circumstance, it means for the next few years for Cubs prospects in the outfield.
Yeah, as far as the extension goes, I'm just very excited for Ian. It seems like he's just desperately sort of wanted to stay in Chicago. He really sort of invested in the city, and whether it's just advertising and promoting Chicago businesses or just sort of constantly hyping up Chicago on his podcast. So I'm really happy for him. I heard Theo Epstein talking on a podcast the other day. I think it was Ryan Russillo's podcast, and Theo was just talking about the importance of nailing your first round pick. And, when I think about Ian now signing this extension, it means basically we're going to get a decade of Ian playing in Chicago. So that's an example of just nailing a first round pick, and especially like a top 10 pick, and the value that can be in sort of sustaining a franchise and bridging success from one era to the next is awesome. So yeah, I'm all for it. I think it's a great deal. I think, he gets the life-changing money. The Cubs get the certainty of having him there in left field without the commitment of worrying about it on the back end.
Yeah, and if you're looking at an outfield in Chicago now, it's pretty well set in stone for them. I mean, in the corners, right? You got Ian Happ in left field for the next few years. You got Seiya Suzuki in right field for the next few years. Right now, Cody Bellinger's out in center field. That's probably not the next few years type of thing. We know that he has an option for next year. I just don't imagine he is back with the Cubs next year. But I mean, it's early in the season. Who's to say? But with 2 of 3 spots filled in the outfield through 2026, through the 2026 season, there are Cubs outfield prospects that are relatively close. There's guys that are a little bit further away. I mentioned that we're going to be talking about Owen Caissie and PCA and other lights, but as far as this goes, we got 2 guys that are 20 years old playing AA baseball in PCA and Owen Caissie. And that's not even to mention the AAA guys like Brennen Davis. You got Nelson Velazquez just got optioned down to AAA. Alexander Canario is a guy who is currently injured, but he will be in AAA later this year. And that's not even to mention Kevin Alcantara, who I think might have the most upside of anybody in the system right now. So it's a good problem to have. I tweeted out as soon as that extension came out, right? As soon as the Ian Happ extension news came out, I think that sometimes you and I and Todd and Zumac, we get people look at us as prospect guys, which is totally fine, but we think that like we don't care as much about the major league product, right? We love that Ian Happ got extended. Like that is a player development system that is working. That is a player that is very good. Keep good players that you already have on your major league roster. You don't have to hope for prospects. You don't have to be hopeful for these guys. If you have a good player, especially a homegrown player like Ian Happ, that is on your major league roster that you can extend them. Having all these prospects coming up, having 5 or 6 names you can throw out as potential major league contributors for one outfield spot is a damn good problem to have. And I think that's the basis of all of this, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think it is true that they're all now probably fighting for 1 or 2 spots if we think about the DH too. And, does that mean they're a little more blocked than they were before Ian signed the extension? Yeah, probably. Does it mean that like the percent chance that those guys get traded, sort of pick your guy and say like, is he a little more likely to eventually get traded out of the organization? Yeah, that's probably true as well. But ultimately, like, I think we can forget how rare it is for a prospect to come up and succeed in the majors. Like it is not, there's 100 prospects that get ranked as top 100 guys every year. And, a fifth of those guys really end up as like true difference makers. And so I think you want as many bites at the apple as possible. So if you have, if you have 5 guys that are like legitimate center field options for the majors, that is really good. And I think that the Cubs will sort of be able to use the next 2 years to identify who the best one is. And then if there's more guys that are truly like major league caliber everyday players, then you either find a spot for them at DH or you send them somewhere else and you get value coming in the other way. So it'll work itself out. But yeah, they are definitely a little more blocked.
I bring it up all the time, but it's the Dodgers problem, right? Like the Dodgers, where they continue to have top 100 prospects every single year, while also winning 100 games every single year, and you just have so much talent that you address that problem not when guys are down here in AA. You address the problem as they are ready for the big leagues, right? Yep. And so when they're ready for the big leagues, you find a spot for them or you trade them away. That's pretty much as simple as it gets, right? And so I don't think the Cubs are in that position quite yet. I mean, you got Brennen Davis, who is in AAA. You got, like I said, Canario will be in AAA when he comes back. Nelson Velazquez is a super interesting case at this point. I think that he's different, right? I think that he's a different category than the other 5 guys we've mentioned. that are like potential top 100 prospect guys. Nelson Velazquez is not that. So like he becomes an interesting case. Maybe he's a fourth outfielder on this roster, filling in a DH and stuff every once in a while. But you mentioned the center field thing, right? Like of the guys that I've mentioned here, PCA, Alexander Canario, Kevin Alcantara, and Brennen Davis, all four of those guys at this point in time can play center field. Are they long-term center fielders? Maybe not. But at this point, they can all play center field. Everybody except for Owen Caissie. So you kind of set up well in terms of that, right? Having your corners covered but not center field. That's a pretty good situation.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think if we're looking at that center field position, it's probably Pete's to lose in terms of how the Cubs are projecting, I would say 2024 and beyond, just because the defense there is gives him sort of that natural leg up. But he's also, he's a left-handed bat, so you might end up platooning him with somebody else for a little while as he breaks into the majors, which then creates an opportunity, whether that's for Velazquez or Christopher Morel or Brennen. And yeah, I just think that they've set themselves up well to fill a position that now is open. And then, we talk about someone like Kevin Alcantara. I think that he's sort of well set up, not really blocked by this. I think by the time that he's ready to play every day in the majors, we're probably getting on the back end of those Happ Suzuki deals. And then if Alcantara is there, then the Cubs might make the move to send one of the veterans out to open up a spot for him. And that would be a great problem to have too. So it's probably, it looks real bunched up and blocked, but I think as it naturally starts to play out, I don't think it will end up being as clustery as it seems.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, that and worth pointing out again that Alcantara is not on the same timeline as some of these other guys. I mean, he's down in South Bend right now. He's still 20 years old. Or has he turned 20 yet? Yeah, 20 years old. Yeah. And yeah, he's a guy that you'll see like you said, at the back end of Ian and Suzuki's contracts. So that's definitely worth pointing out. Do you think that this, I don't know, do you think that this has any, this shows that the front office is indicating anything towards these prospects in the fact that they did feel like they needed to extend Ian Happ? I know we talked about it at the beginning of this, that like when you have good major league players, you extend them, you keep them on your roster. Do you think this has any impact on the way the front office views their prospects right now?
I don't think so. I think more than anything, it's an indication of what they think of Ian and what happened in the last 2 years. We're not that far removed from Ian struggling in the majors, going back to Iowa, working on stuff. I think 2 years ago, Ian shows that sort of power breakout. Last year, the power steps back a little bit. He shows sort of a defensive breakout, makes more contact. And this year we're starting to see, and what I think the Cubs are betting on is we can put all those tools together, have an all-star player that you're getting at like $20 million a year. That's just a win for everybody. And I think the deal just sort of only speaks to their belief in him and not so much, any doubt they have in the players in the system.
Low-key, I think it's something where prospects or like other players in the organization, not necessarily just prospects, just players in the organization, like respect that the Cubs gave Ian Happ this extension. Like given Ian's like that he was a first round pick, that he struggled, that he came up to the bigs, that he got sent back down, that he worked hard, that he came back up. Like given that whole situation with Ian Happ, like I think a player has got to see that he earned that extension with the Chicago Cubs, and they've got to just like that all the way around, from respecting the front office's situation to respecting Ian Happ and who he is as a player and a person. I bet that only does positive things for other players in the organization in seeing that this got done.
Yeah, and I mean, you could say almost the exact same thing about Nico's extension. Nico, you talk to players in the system, like it was almost weird for me. Like Nico spent very little time in the minor leagues, but when you talk to guys, like I don't know that I've like in 10 years of following the Cubs system closely, like players talk about Nico in a way that like they were his teammate for like 2 weeks and they just love and respect him so much. And I think Ian has some of that, even like from afar, like guys that don't really know him that well, just really respect the way that he sort of went about his career and sort of like organically went from struggling to all-star. And yeah, I think that having those guys is sort of you can hold them up and show the prospects, like, if you go about your business this way and you get the results that these guys got, then there's going to be a home for you here.
Let's stick on the outfield kick and stick with two guys we just mentioned in PCA and Owen Caissie. Let's talk about Owen Caissie's season so far, right? Like specifically, I want to call out this week we saw Owen Caissie put up a 3 home run performance, which is outrageous and exactly what we're looking for out of Owen Caissie. This year, his stat line, I just tweeted out of the vines how wild his stat line is, and remember, like, whenever we're talking about like season long stats at this point, like, please take them, like, we are taking them with a grain of salt. We're like just pointing them out as something to acknowledge, but not like live and die off of, because we're at the guys with the most plate appearances in the system in Iowa at this point have not even reached 50 plate appearances, I don't think. So
they're changing so much every day. I mean, one game can change an OPS more than 100 points. So
yeah, it's outrageously small sample sizes. We still have I'd say a couple more weeks, at least a few more weeks before we can start looking at stats and like taking things from them, specifically like looking at like strikeout percentages and walk percentages and swing whiff rates, stuff like that. Like that's when in a couple of weeks we can start looking at those type of numbers. But worth pointing out the hilarity of Owen Caissie's numbers to start off this season, because as of we're recording this on Sunday, actually before any of the 6 games going on Sunday, scheduled for Sunday, I guess, actually take place. But going into Sunday, Owen Caissie had a 345 batting average with a 367 OBP and was slugging 897. That's slugging, not OPSing. His OPS is 1263. But on the other end of the spectrum, he's got a strikeout rate over 50%. He's got a walk rate under 5%. And his BABIP is 667, which is, that number is just hilarious to me, right? Like and that's what happens when you're striking out that much. Every time you put the ball in play, it's doing something crazy. You're hitting for extra bases. You're seeing those three home run games. What have you liked from Owen Caissie so far?
Yeah, so a couple years ago when Owen Caissie was in Myrtle Beach, he didn't hit for a ton of power, and it was hard to talk about him because you were what you're telling people is like, this is a power prospect, a premium power prospect. And even last year with South Bend, I mean, we're talking about 11 home runs in more than 100 games. Like, I think there were people out there that were starting to doubt a little bit. Like, is this true? Is this true that he is a premium power prospect? And what was holding him back, I think, a little bit, and this is sort of natural, this happens a lot, is that, he was using that sort of like amateur all fields approach, like a guy who was like very geared to hit the ball to left center a lot, kind of inside outed a ton of balls. And so I'd said it in the past, like, this is a guy that the Cubs were going to have to teach to pull the ball, teach to cheat a little bit and be willing to like be looking to go to right field. And what we're seeing so far early in the season is that very much. I mean, he's pulling the ball 46% of the time. He's never been above 34% in the past. Opposite field has like gone completely lower. I mean, he's like 39-40% in the past. It's 15% so far this year. Plus he's just hitting everything in the air. The ground ball rate is half of what it was last year. And those batted ball numbers do, we talked about the small sample size, they stabilize a little quicker than the overall hitting numbers. So I think we are seeing something real in those numbers. But then it also goes to explain the strikeouts a little bit. I mean, that one informs the other there, which is that he is looking to hit the ball a little earlier. He's looking to sort of open up and hit to right field, and that exposes him a little bit more for strikeouts. So that's going to be the challenge for the next couple months, is just balancing how can we be looking for home runs on the right pitches, but not leave ourselves too open to strike out 50% of the time.
It's way easier to teach a guy to go from being an all fields hitter to now you need to pull the ball, get out in front, show off the power a little bit more. It's easier to do that than to go the other way, where a guy is just yanking the ball every single at bat, and you're saying, hey, try going the opposite way. Like that doesn't go smoothly. That's not a smooth transition. So that's why I think we were so high on Owen Caissie even before he was showing off that power, is because like it's a really impressive talent to be able to use the whole field that way, and he was really good at that. I think that I'm looking at a guy below him in Moises Ballesteros, who's another guy that's very good at that and using all fields when they hit. Actually, Ballesteros is a little bit better at getting the ball in the air at this point in his career than Owen Caissie was, but he hits the ball. Owen Caissie hits the ball very, very hard. He always has. So instead of hitting the ball on the ground to the opposite field at 110 miles an hour, getting him to pull the ball in the air at 110 miles an hour is a big, big difference. And that's where that slugging really starts to take off.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think you can see the negatives in these numbers for sure. I mean, 16 strikeouts in 29 at bats, but I think that overwhelmingly it's been a positive start because we're starting to check that box that was sort of like the big one hanging. Like, we got to get here before we can really be considered a major league prospect, and he's starting to show us that he is there. And so now it's just, it's smoothing that approach. It's sort of taking what he's doing now, but not working so hard to do it all the time. And I think that'll happen. I mean, he's only walked once this year, which is very sort of unlike Owen. It's, I think when he was young, the plate approach was a huge point of emphasis that people always talked about him, like a guy who has a really good plate approach. And so you're surprised it's only one walk, but then I look at the numbers. I mean, he's seeing more pitches per plate appearance than he ever has. Which is interesting. It also goes to show you, the double A level is really hard. It's a really big jump. And so, if you're succeeding while you're learning to deal with harder pitchers, that's a big win too.
Yeah. He's Baseball America came out this past week with like the top 10 youngest players in each league. And of course, Owen Caissie was on that list for the Southern League. I think he was the 6th youngest or 5th youngest in the league. That's important to remember, man. He's still super, super young. He's still got a lot of growing to do. The development process of players, I think that this is the case with all players, including pitchers, but I think it's more apparent maybe in hitters where certain guys need to work on specific things in order, right? You can't just say, hey, you need to start pulling the ball in the air and working counts better and doing you can't do multiple things all at one time. So we saw Owen Caissie getting better he was good at using all fields. We saw him recognizing pitches. Now he's maybe working on pulling the ball in the air. Then after that, he can get back to incorporating that all fields approach. It's just a step-by-step process. You know what I mean? And I think that's something I've taken away during my time covering Cubs prospects over the last few years. I think that Yohendrick Pinango is another example of like, you saw very clearly like that process and him working on one thing at a time, right? Where when he first came to full season ball in the States, every single hit he got was down the left field line, the opposite field. It felt like every single one. And then it was, all right, let's see you pull the ball in the air a little bit more. And then it was, all right, let's work some counts because you're not walking nearly enough. It's like you can see those very, very distinct like changes every single year or every single month or whatever it might be. So, just super exciting from Owen Caissie for sure.
I can't wait for when you get Bash up and going with these season numbers, just because Owen's, be how young he is versus that league. If he's having success like he is right now, he's going to like break your spreadsheet, I think.
So I actually today on Sunday have been putting the finishing touches on that. So I'm glad you brought that up. So as people are listening you guys will be listening to this on Tuesday. The all of the season long stats for all Cubs prospects should be at this point up over at northsidebound.com, just on the stats tab. If they're not up at this point, as you're listening to this, then go tweet at me and yell at me, because the goal is to get those ready to go today by the end of the day on Sunday. And included on that will be the Bash numbers for all players throughout the system. I'm trying to stall a little bit here because I might have Owen Caissie's already up and already complete, but give me just a minute. See if I have them up to date for Owen. Yes. So I do have Owen Caissie's Bash. Remember with Bash that it is not quite as extreme as what like we see with WRC plus. Like when guys perform ridiculously well, you can see like numbers above 200 for WRC plus. That does not happen with Bash. Owen Caissie is at a 182, which means that he's 82% better than league average, or better than average for a player. That incorporates his age. That incorporates a lot of what WRC plus includes, as well as stolen bases too, which stolen bases don't really have as much impact. Actually, no impact on Owen Caissie this year up to this point. But 182 is a ridiculously high score. Like that would be by far the highest, obviously. So even though he's striking out a lot and walking hardly at all, when you're putting up those numbers, it doesn't matter. You know, when you're putting up those numbers, again, take the overall numbers with a grain of salt. But yeah, his 182, I don't think would be the highest in the system. Because I think that a guy that we're talking about later might be the highest, but I'm just going off the cuff here. 182, ridiculously high. It might break the system. You're right. It's really impressive from Owen Caissie.
Yeah, it's awesome. And, I think that sort of naturally gets us into talk about his other teammate in Tennessee, Pete Crow Armstrong, another, super young guy playing in AA. Just to sort of update where Pete's at. He is at a 357 average, 400 on base, and 536 slug so far. He, just like Owen, is not walking yet. 3.3% walk rate, which is just one walk. But he's only striking out 23% of the time, which is a nice, exciting part. And then I think the reason that we just sort of got to talk about him this week is that Pete had a triple this weekend. I think it was Friday. And when he got to third base, avoided a tag by sort of stopping his slide midway and then just sort of reaching for the base with his foot, and then pulled off, I don't know, one of the most epic triple celebrations I think baseball has ever seen, right?
What was your favorite part of that? Was it him? So there's 4 different elements to this play, right? It's one, him showing off the power to center field, right? To hit it off the base of the wall. In center field. The second element is him showing off the speed, getting to third on a triple. When the video shows him rounding second base, the dude is absolutely cruising. The third element is the ridiculous slide. It's like the Javi style slide, but just like honestly, it reminded me more of the Anthony Rizzo slide from a few years ago, where he's sliding the third, he stops, and then, he stops his foot for a slide. It's magic. I think it was when Rizzo said the magic thing. I think it was that. But this was far more graceful than Rizzo's. So that's the third element. The fourth is like the ridiculous celebration. I think he pulled out, like, when guys in hockey get a goal and like they do their like signature celebration after they score a goal, and every once in a while a guy will get happy and do multiple of them. PCA did that, where he did the arm like
air guitar,
air guitar, and then he did like the jazz hands, and he just did 5 different celebrations. What was your favorite element of the PCA activity or thing that he did with his triple?
It's definitely the celebration. We talked, I think, in one of the first episodes we did about how Brennen Davis and Pete Crow Armstrong are 2 guys that like are lauded for how awesome they are as teammates, but they're totally different in the way they are. That, Brennen is that sort of like easygoing, like always, smiling, like everyone sort of digs his vibe. Pete is like the intense gamer that everyone wants to go to war for. And like that, I thought was such an awesome snapshot of just like what Pete is as a player, which is, just like balls to the wall. And then he gets there and he's just like staring at his teammates, and he's just having like, he just shows that he's like having the time of his life playing, and then just like hyping up his teammates and like legitimately like using that as a moment to be like, let's go like win a baseball game is awesome. And just the way that it kept building. I mean, every time he finished a celebration, he felt like he had to go into another one. And then, he had to go back and get his helmet, and he like forgot that he also had to call timeout. And so he called timeout like 3 times. And it was like such a bizarre, but like super fun sequence. I loved it.
I'd pay like real life money to see some video footage of the dugout throughout that entire play. Whether it's him hitting it or like the celebration, I would pay money to see all of his teammates' reactions to all of that, because I'm sure they were going absolutely nuts as well.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, you want to hear the audio too, because there were definitely some fun things getting yelled, I guarantee you.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to talk on that today because I think that like it's more than just like him putting up good numbers with PCA. You know, I mean, we know that he's really good, really talented, one of the most impressive defensive center fielders in minor league baseball, but probably the most impressive defensive center fielder in minor league baseball. We know that he's putting up good offensive numbers, but like it's more than that, man. Like the way that it was more than that for Javi Baez, it's more than that for PCA, and like just I've said it before. It's just it's hilarious to me. It's so funny that was the trade. It was Javi Baez for a different version of Javi Baez. You know, I love that.
Yep. I think we are. I think we're really likely that we're building towards him being the opening day center fielder in 2024. It just feels like the momentum is all there, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's stick on some hitters. I know we're looking at our note sheet here. Let's stick with some hitters while we're on this topic, and go to a couple AAA guys because Matt Mervis is mashing, and he just can't stop, won't stop. We're seeing Eric Hosmer up with the big league team, and we're seeing Eric Hosmer up with the big league team, and then you look down, you see the numbers that Matt Mervis is putting up, and they, in a lot of ways, are similar to what he did last year. You know, I mean, I think the numbers aren't identical, but like the way he's going about doing it and like the overall, like the vibe of the numbers is very similar. So read these off here. His batting average is 293 with a 456 on base percentage, which is hilarious. A 585 slugging. That is good for a 160 WRC plus. And he's only striking out 16% of the time while walking 23% of the time. So the reason why I said that kind of mimics what we saw from last year is we saw a guy that as he climbed the ladder, he continued to strike out less. He continued to walk more. It's not going to happen where he continues to put up a 16% strikeout rate and 23% walk rate. Those are stupid impressive numbers. And that walk rate is why he has a on base percentage north of 450. So, you mentioned a guy that is like you mentioned the skill earlier with Owen Caissie, the skill of like knowing when and how to turn on pitches. Matt Mervis has that down. We've talked about that before. We're like that is a skill that he has mastered, even if he's not hitting the ball 115 miles an hour, which he showed earlier this year. He hit 113 or something like that.
Sounds right. Yeah.
So he has that in his bag of tricks. He's not going to consistently do that, but when he knows how to hit and in what ways to hit that make his value even more impressive, that's what like gets me with Matt Mervis. So, what have you liked from him, and when are we going to see the dude in Chicago, man?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've sort of entered the week where this is really going to come to the forefront. I mean, I thought Eric Hosmer the first 10 games in Chicago, I thought it was like a totally sort of acceptable, like if that's what you're getting out of that spot, you know, that works. And it wasn't sort of killing me that Matt was in AAA. It sort of made sense. It's sort of started to turn the last few games where Eric's, you know, looking a lot, he's struggling a lot more, and it's happening at the same time that Matt just seems so dialed in. I mean, you know, I think what impresses me the most about Matt is like he's not up there like seeing the first couple pitches to like get deeper into the count. He's not trying to walk, right? Like there are guys that like when that's a point of emphasis, if the front office told him like, you know, we need to see like some smoothed out walk numbers or something, it's not really what he's trying to do. Like he will swing at one of the first two pitches a lot. If you see him in a game, like there's probably two at bats where he's attacking early. But then if he doesn't love those first two pitches, like he'll grind out an at bat. We saw an awesome at bat this week that I think was a 12 pitch at bat that with the bases loaded where he drew a walk. So, you know, he gets in there and fights too when he needs to. So he's, I don't know, he's in a really impressive place, and, you know, he's going to cross 60 plate appearances today. You know, he'll probably get to 80 by the end of the week, which at that point, you know, we're getting into the territory of these numbers really being true, especially when you add last year's numbers. I think, I think it's about time. I think, you know, I think the Cubs probably wanted it to be May 15th, and I don't think they're going to be able to make it there.
What are your thoughts on? So I know that I when in watching Mervis's at bats,
Yeah.
There's a lot of there's at bats where he is grinding at bats, but there are a lot of times where pitchers are not giving him anything to hit, and
Yeah.
it's very apparent that they're trying to avoid pitching to him because he is one of the most impressive hitters at the AAA level.
Yep.
As he reaches the majors, that's not going to be the case so much, right? Like guys are going to go at him. So that's where we're going to see that walk rate probably decrease by quite a bit.
Yep.
And then the strikeout rate increase a little bit as well. Do you have any serious concerns about that? I'm not in the serious concerns category of that. It's worth pointing out, I guess,
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to get punched in the face for sure. Although what often happens with prospects when they come up to the majors is the first thing that pitchers will try is to beat them with fastballs and to see if they can beat them with fastballs. Matt, even, we've seen some scouting reports out there doubting if Matt can hit fastballs. I don't think that's the case. I think he loves them. I think he goes into every at bat searching for them. So I think he could be really successful out of the gate if that's the approach the pitchers take. But sort of that next second one, which we often see, and we saw with Christopher Morel last year, is like when they start like going breaking ball heavy and getting you pitching backwards a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a learning curve there, and I think he's going to have to, he's going to see pitches that he's never seen that quality of a slider, for example, before, and like he's going to have to learn, what works for him to deal with like super plus pitches. But I think he's going to figure it out. I think that the minor leagues have given him everything they can at this point, and he's solved that problem. So you just got to allow him to try to solve the next one.
What's your date? What date are you predicting?
I mean, I think we're like, I don't know, 10 days away, maybe.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think May 1st.
Yeah,
I think if he's not up by May 1st, I'd be shocked.
Yeah, I mean, it really feels like this weekend it really has started to be a thing that I would imagine is on Jed's mind in a way that like it was on our mind a week ago. We talked about it the last time I was on the podcast 2 weeks ago. Like, it's a thing that's been out there. I think right now it's like definitely a thing that Jed's thinking about.
Yeah. Another guy in AAA that is murdering the baseball is Christopher Morel. I'll read off his numbers to start off this too, because it's fun reading off these crazy numbers. Christopher Morel so far, he's batting .378. He has a .500 on base percentage, and is slugging .822. That is good. That is good for a .226 WRC plus. So I was talking about those 200 numbers. That's where that comes into play. 29% strikeout rate for Morel and an 18% walk rate. He hasn't really cut down the strikeouts to the degree that I was hoping Morel would when he was sent back down to AAA, but he is walking more, and I like seeing that 18% walk rate. He just looks good though, dude. Like there's sometimes you look at the stat line, you're impressed with that, but like just watching him, I'm even more impressed. Right, like he's hitting the ball very hard. I don't think that the strikeout rate is really like indicative of like what I'm watching. Like if you would have like had me watch his at bats throughout games, not just like watch his at bats back to back, but like watch just him throughout the season, and you were to say like, hey, like what do you think his strikeout rate is? I probably wouldn't predict something that high, just because I think that everything else he's doing is so loud that it's taking away from the strikeout rate.
Yeah, I think when he's struggling, like there are like those non-competitive at bats where you just like, okay, he was going to strike out that entire time. That's not really what we're seeing. I think it's more he's seeing a ton of pitches. I mean, I think he's just getting to a lot more sort of 2-2 counts and places like that where you just leave yourself a little less room for error. But the overall, like you take those strikeouts if it comes with that batting line, and so I think it's just, even though it's still a too high strikeout rate, it's a much healthier way of getting to that number than it was before.
Get you someone who talks about you the way Alex Cohen talks about Christopher Morel at bats.
Totally.
I love it. I think that he's another guy that we probably see up in Chicago fairly soon. I don't know what happens in terms of like a roster move to make that happen.
Yeah, and Patrick Wisdom's playing so well.
And Patrick Wisdom is playing really well. So I think that we're close to that point with Morel, much like Mervis, where it's like I think the Morel is what he is, you know. Like
Yeah.
I think that I think we know what Christopher Morel is, and I think we have for a few years now. I don't know. I'm glad that he's doing as well as he is in AAA right now, but I'd like to see him on the major league roster in some way. I know that there's a second baseman up in Chicago that could probably make way for some Christopher Morel action, but we'll see.
Yeah, my instinct with him is that they're probably waiting on like the next injury for him to come up, you know, whether it could be Wisdom, it could be Horner, it could be Bellinger, it could be Suzuki, like whoever is sort of the next guy that has to spend 2-3 weeks on the IL, that is the guy that Morel is going to sort of come in and just walk into a job. I think David Ross just doesn't want the pressure of having to figure out, you know, how do I play this guy when my roster is fully healthy? You know, that is a little tricky, and I sort of understand why they're in that position with him. I think they're waiting for the injury, and then it's sort of the ball's in his court to be like, okay, here's your shot. It's a small one. It might be 3 weeks, but like, go win a job, go make yourself undeniable.
Yeah. Last comment I have on the Mash and Morel situation is, and listening to Brendan Miller over at the CHGO Cubs podcast, he really likes to emphasize that the way the Cubs major league roster is currently constructed, that there's a lot of safe plays, right? There's a lot of guys that are not going to be awful, but they're also not going to be studs in any way.
Yep.
And you need to be able to call up a few guys or feature a few guys in that major league lineup every single day that can give those peak outcomes, right? That their floor might be way lower in terms of what they do at the major league level, but their ceiling is far, far higher. And I think Morel and Mervis are two guys. If you're looking at a 1-for-1 swap, right? If you're looking at Mervis over Hosmer, great example of that. If you're looking at Morel over Madrigal, terrific example of that as well, where like their high-end outcomes are way more impressive, and that might get the Cubs a few extra wins throughout the year and bump them up from just outside the wild card hunt to like competing for a division, maybe. You know what I mean? Like it's those wins matter, and I think that those are two good examples of that.
Yeah, I think variance is the word we're talking about there,
Yes.
which is, you know, the Cubs like out of the gates wanted to go with low variance players. I think the sort of theory for this team was like hang 500 for the first 50 games, and then we're going to get you better with prospects, then we're going to get you better with trades. Like that's the way that this team succeeds. And so like they're going to introduce variance as the season goes a little bit, and you know that is what'll give them some upside. So you know, we're recording this Sunday morning. The Cubs lost a bummer of a game Saturday night. But as I was sort of waking up this morning, I was reminding myself, like, hey, like 500 on May 15th is a win for this team, because I do think this team has like the players in place to allow them to get better as they go.
And as fans, if they're 500 at the trade deadline, that means that likely means they're trying to acquire talent and not sell away talent, which is as a fan,
will,
yeah, that's exactly what you want to see. So one quick hit on one more hitter before we get into our pitcher segment. Haydn McGeary is good. Haydn McGeary is a large man. He's a talented baseball player, and he hits the ball very, very hard.
Yeah. Yeah, Haydn is fourth in the Midwest League in WRC Plus as we record this morning, which is awesome. I mean, we're talking about a guy that is really, really not far removed from Colorado Mesa University. So, you know, I mean, we're the jump from small college to high A is massive, and he's doing it just so comfortably, right?
Yeah, I mean, since I'm in the game of reading off stat lines here, hopefully this makes for good podcasting. He is batting .344 this year with a .417 OBP. He's slugging .688, which is good for a 1.104 OPS. Striking out, this is the number I like the most, is that he's striking out less than 17%. He is walking more than 11%. If I'm throwing bash into the equation here, he is bashing 143. So for some reason, I thought that his numbers were even higher than they were, and I thought that was he had Owen Caissie beat, regardless of his age being a little bit older than league average. But 143 bash for Haydn McGeary, which is still super, super, super impressive. Man, it's always going to be like, can he keep the strikeout rate down because of his size, because of his long levers? But like, we know he can make elite level contact with the baseball. We saw a home run from him. He homered on back-to-back days this past week. And I believe it was his second home run that really caught my eye as like it just the moment his bat made contact with the ball, it just it exploded. It was an extraordinary thing to look at. I want to point out too that he homered, I think, a couple minutes after Moises Ballesteros homered or hit a grand slam, or it was like they were within minutes of each other. And I was just thinking, I was like, this is Cubs prospect Twitter heaven. Like Ballesteros and McGeary are two of the most beloved prospects by prospect followers. Yeah. And for both those guys to homer within minutes of each other was like perfect.
I was watching McGeary swing this morning. I was trying to think of how to describe it. And I'm gonna say something that's probably sacrilegious because I'm gonna compare him to a prospect that's like that was a top 10 prospect this offseason and might be the rookie of the year this year. Someone that I know that you've seen, Greg, in person. When I saw Jordan Walker in the Arizona Fall League, the Cardinals stud that has come up and just hit everything that he sees. I had this experience where I was like, okay, this is a top prospect, and in person, his bat speed doesn't wow you. It's just like the bat doesn't move as fast as I expected. But then the way that he hits everything, sort of what you realize is like the way that he's rotating and using his lower half, his hands just sort of follow naturally. And he's catching up to everything and hitting it, 110, 115 everywhere. And I had the same experience watching McGeary this week where I don't think the bat seems to move that fast, but he's catching up to fastballs and hitting them to left field so easily. I think he just rotates incredibly well. He's big and strong, and the bat speed is definitely enough when you're using your hips like that to sort of follow naturally. He's obviously not, he's not going to reach the majors as young as Jordan Walker because he's already older than him. He's not going to be that level of prospect. But I do think like it's a useful proxy to think about how he succeeds in the same way that Jordan does.
Maybe you're seeing something different, but from my views of his at bats, I think that McGeary does a really good job of keeping his hands in, close to his body, which is really important when you're talking about two different things. When you're talking about the bat speed not being elite, you got to be able to keep you're not casting your hands out. And then two is with that size, like you got to keep your hands in. You have to, or else pitchers, once you climb the ladder, once you get up to AA, they're just going to kill you on inside fastballs, like absolutely kill you. So that's important to keep up. Hopefully that's not something I've just noticed in certain at bats. Hopefully that's a trend. That's how he hits. But that's been encouraging to me. I think that's been a contributing factor to that low strikeout rate.
Yeah, I totally agree. There were a couple of pitches this week, inside pitches that I know he hit a right center field double on a sort of middle in pitch, and that shows like, okay, you're staying you're not getting around it too much. He is very rotational, so that could like theoretically be a problem. But if he's keeping his hands in, he's staying back, then he leaves himself open to hit those balls to right center, and that's like a complete hitter. And he's still sort of on that. He's in that middle spot of us trying to figure out, like, is this a real prospect, or is this, somebody with video game college numbers that, we're getting too excited about too early. If it goes much further with him looking like this, then like we are going to hype him up as a real prospect very soon.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of Matt Mervis early in the season last year, where we were we kind of going into the year, we weren't willing to call Matt Mervis a top 20 prospect, obviously. But we were like, there was just something there that we thought that he had, right? And then he started to take off. He got off to a really hot start at the beginning of the year, and we're like, oh, is this legit? Like, we don't want to say anything yet, but it feels legit. Yep. And then he continued to take off. McGeary feels the same way, where it's like he put up the super impressive college numbers at a location where offensive numbers are really, really impressive anyways. But like he has a little bit there to like dream on before the season started. And now he's gotten off to this super strong start. And so we're saying, is this real? Is this something that he can continue? Obviously, he's not going to continue doing this. But we said the same thing about Matt Mervis. I'm not comparing him 1-for-1 for Matt Mervis. It just feels like that situation. You know what I mean?
Totally agree.
All right. We got two pitchers. You want to talk about Horton or Franklin first?
Let's go with Kohl Franklin.
All right. I like that. So Kohl Franklin put together arguably his best start of his pro career. I mean, I listened to that argument. He went 4 innings pitched this week, gave up only 1 hit and no runs, and he struck out 7 while only walking 2. Not only did the stat line look good, but I thought all of his stuff looked really good too. The fastball, the changeup and curveball that we've grown accustomed to seeing from Kohl, and the new slider. I don't know if you want to talk about the new slider at all.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we even saw, like, I think it'd be very easy when you're debuting a new slider to, at the beginning, only throw it to righties and counts where, like, if you miss, it's okay. Like, Kohl was ready. He was ready to throw the slider a lot. He had a strikeout to a lefty with the slider. It was sort of billed this offseason as like the sweeper, right? It's that grip. And I thought that it was going to be a real horizontal, like, sort of just frisbee pitch. It's not really that. It's more, it's a little horizontal, and it's got a pretty good amount of vertical. Like, it kind of has a little bit of a look of a slurvy curveball. But the velocity sort of bridges that gap between fastball and his slower curveball a little bit. So I think it's a totally, like, useful pitch to have in the arsenal. And I think it's going to help him this year, you know, with 4 pitches now, help him get through those outings where he's struggling the second time through. And that was a problem that he faced in a handful of starts last year. And so now just having another offering to throw at people, and like the comfort that he's already showing with it, is huge. So yeah, it was an exciting first look at that pitch.
Maybe the most important thing with Kohl's slider to me is that because he has that, he can throw his curveball less. I talked about it last week with Riley Thompson. I think it kind of fits in the same category. We're like, we know Kohl Franklin and Riley Thompson's curveballs are very good. But we also know that if you're throwing a curveball a whole lot, that's probably not a good thing. You know, like that there needs to be a better, a more frequently used off speed or a breaking ball, not necessarily just off speed, because they both have really good changeups. They're very similar in a lot of ways, really, these two guys, Riley Thompson and Kohl Franklin. But my point is that if he can throw that slider more, then he can utilize the curveball in better ways, not as like you have to chase this pitch. It's just as a change of pace. You talked about the velo, that kind of bridging that velo gap. The velo with the fastball, the South Bend gun had him touching triple digits. I think he was probably sitting in the mid to high 90s range, which is still great. Like, he's not going to be a consistent 100 mile an hour fastball thrower.
Right.
But the fact that he was sitting mid to upper 90s instead of low to mid 90s is significant.
Yeah, I think he was like 94 to 98. And more importantly, like, one thing that I noticed with him was sort of a willingness to just, like, be okay throwing the ball in the middle of the plate to get ahead of the count, or like early. Sometimes last year, you know, I think he just fell behind so often. And when you're digging from that uphill place, it makes it tricky. When you're an A ball with a 97 mile per hour fastball, like, it is okay. It is 100% okay to throw the ball down the middle to get ahead in the count. And I actually really like that. I thought Casey Opitz did just an incredible job behind the plate in that start, like managing Kohl, using the changeup as often as he did, especially like there was a 4th inning. In the 4th inning, Kohl ran into a little bit of trouble. And last year, the wheels would have fallen off. Absolutely. He had 2 runners on. He fell down 2-0 in the count. And it just felt like, like, we've gotten so excited these first 3 innings, and we're going to have that 4th inning blow up. Casey went out there, talked to him, came back, 2-0 changeup, pretty much down the middle, got that strike, then went fastball, got the out, and completed like a start that we're talking about in an exciting context. And, you know, it goes to show that when you have those veteran catchers in the low minors to help those pitchers grind through, it makes a huge difference. So, like, shouts to Kohl for just blowing us away, but also shouts to Opitz for helping, like, show it.
I'm stating the obvious here, but I think pitchers like throwing to Casey Opitz.
Yes.
Yeah, it was confidence. That's my biggest takeaway from that start from Kohl Franklin, is he seemed ultra confident from pitch 1 to the final pitch he threw, which is awesome. All right, so Cade Horton made his pro debut. He debuted for Myrtle Beach this week, and you charted every single pitch that he threw, didn't you?
Yeah.
First of all, how did you do that with the broadcast with the camera angle? Not easy.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely not 100% confident in my results, but we give it our best chance.
But man, it's super exciting to see Cade Horton make his first pro career. I mean, this has been a weird situation since he got drafted last summer, because it was such a surprising pick that I think that we've had this elevated excitement, both for prospect followers like us, but also I think casual fans of just the major league team. I think they've been like honed in on what Cade Horton does, because the consensus at I'm trying to figure out how to describe this. The consensus at the major league level of fan is that this was an awful pick. I think that was where minds originally went to, considering who else was on the board, considering how low Cade Horton was ranked. So I think that people have been really honed in on this start. So it was super exciting to see him finally make this start on. Let me pull up here his numbers from the start. He ended up going. Sorry, I'm getting some ads on Baseball Reference, so that's never good. Do you have his numbers for the start pulled up here?
I believe he went 2 1/3 innings. He allowed 2 hits, no runs, struck out 5. Am I remembering this right? I don't have it up, so 2 1/3. Yeah, 2 hits, no runs, no walks, and struck out 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I'd point out is that I believe the lineup that Cade was facing, he went through it one time against Lynchburg, so he faced exactly 9 hitters. 7 of them were left-handed, and so interesting way to make your pro debut for a guy who throws as many sliders. And sliders from righties to lefties are that's asking a lot, but it did not deter him. He threw a bunch of sliders. He ended up getting 8 swinging strikes in the outing, with like 47 pitches. That's a primo number, and he just looked really comfortable. It was not one of those like nervous looking starts at all. He looked like he felt he belonged. He looked like he felt that the hitters couldn't touch him. And if we're being honest, like the hitters can't touch him. It's gonna be a very short time at this level, I think.
Like the past couple of years, how we talked about how the Cubs, the Myrtle Beach Pelicans, super young hitters facing off against Tampa Bay Rays affiliate College Arms, and how it's just not fair.
Yep.
How the turntables, like it's seeing Cade Horton out there with Big 12 baseball experience.
Yeah.
Now, granted, with not exactly a full like a Jordan Wicks type career in the Big 12, but like a Big 12 quality pitcher out there with clearly stuff that is way too advanced for the low A level. Like that slider is comical how good that slider was on the other night. So and the fastball was good as well. So it's he's way too good for this level. He'll get some action in Myrtle Beach before getting bumped up to South Bend later this season, I'm sure. But the slider was sword inducing throughout the entire night, and it made for some funny clips of videos.
Yeah, and I was excited because he really was committed to throwing changeups against those lefties too. That's a pitch that I know the Cubs have worked with him in a pitch like the Cubs were very deliberate to not have him make his debut last year. They just had him really work in their lab. And then this spring, it was also like a really sort of slow, deliberate buildup where it was a lot of like live ABs instead of having him pitching games and, do a lot of bullpens in the lab and stuff like that. And I know the changeup was a focus. And so he came out and he threw a bunch of them. It's still a pitch, I think, that's a work in progress, but the way that you're going to get it to the finish line is by staying committed to it. And I like that he's at a level right now where he can just sort of work through that, and he can, sort of figure out both the right pitch usage. That was something we saw with Jordan Wicks last year, just like figure out the right amount to throw the changeup. I know he has a cutter, and it was kind of hard to tell in this outing, like when was he throwing the cutter and how often he's going to end up throwing that. But some of that stuff is going to get worked out here, and that's going to be more important than the results.
Yeah, I cannot wait for Cade Horton to throw at home at Pelicans Ballpark so we can hear Sam Wiederhaft on the call of a Cade Horton start. it was good just to see him make a start and be able to watch him on MILB TV. But we know how good that Pelicans broadcast is. We know how good Sam is on the call. That's going to be a fun, must-watch MILB TV action.
Totally.
All right, man. Anything else that you want to hit on here? I think that we've run through quite a few players. We've reached close to our time limit here, our quote-unquote time limit that we don't actually have. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap things up?
No, I think we did a pretty good job nailing it.
What are you specifically looking out for this week as far as prospect action goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hitters have impressed more in their early season than the pitchers, like just sort of system wide. So I'd like to get a couple big starts from pitchers. I'd like our next time, or your next episode, I should say, with Zoo Match to be more focused on more pitchers. I think that'd be exciting to have 4 or 5 just dynamite starts to talk about.
Yeah, that would be fun. It's funny because the first round through the rotation, we did see some really impressive starts on the mound from AA down to low A. Not as much up in AAA.
Yeah.
That's been not great, but there had been some good starts, but there's been some real impressive offensive performers. I am really excited. It feels like a torrid stretch for Kevin Alcantara is coming up.
Yep.
He got off to a really slow start to the season. Totally fine. I mean, over the span of a week, literally just a week. And then we saw him on Sunday, on Saturday. Yeah, on Saturday we really saw him take off, get on base 4 times. He had a home run. Really, and you were talking earlier about the differences one game can make. The numbers just went an outrageous level, an outrageous change from day to day for Kevin Alcantara. But it just feels like he's looking comfortable at the plate, which is the biggest thing to me up at the high A level. And I'm just ready for this crazy torrid stretch from Alcantara coming up here.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw another name that belongs in that mix, which is Christian Hernandez. I'm not even going to jinx it by even talking too much about it. I'm just going to say, keep doing what you're doing, and we will get very excited and dedicate 7 episodes this summer to you if you keep what you're doing. So just Christian Hernandez. I like it.
I love it. All right. For everybody out there listening, we will be back in 1 week. It will not be with Zumac. It will be, though, with Sam Wiederhaft is joining the show next week, which is fun because I thought it was kind of appropriate to get him on when we had him. My plan was to go back through the broadcasters in kind of the same order that we did for the season previews.
Yeah.
But my thinking was that there are so many names at Myrtle Beach that we just are not familiar with. It's such a young roster. So many guys that were called up from the Arizona Complex League from a year ago. So to get Sam's perspective on some of those players is going to be huge. We can kind of get to know some players a little bit better. So you guys out there have that to look forward to, learning a little bit about some newish players. Bryan, anything to plug?
I'm going to write a couple pieces this week at Bleacher Nation. I think Owen Caissie is going to be someone I'm going to talk about, probably look at those strikeouts a little bit and just see if there's anything sort of in there worth specifically working on, but also, hyping up the success he's having. Yeah.
And you can, like I said, you can find my work over at Northside Bound. The stats tab should be updated as you listen to this. Hopefully everything goes. I'm saying that, but there's still some work to do on the back end of the website, and that is never a fun thing to do. So if it's not up, it's not my fault, I swear. But you can be on the lookout for that. We'll be referencing that, the bash numbers specifically on this show throughout the entire summer. So that should be fun to follow. You can find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. You can find him on Twitter at Cub Prospects. Be sure to find the podcast anywhere where you listen to podcasts. You can see our faces on YouTube, all that good stuff. And like I said, we will be back in your ears in one short week. Thanks, guys. Thank you.